The courthouse was cold, impersonal, its fluorescent lights casting a sterile glow on the rows of wooden benches. Eleanor sat in one of them, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her engagement ring still faintly visible as an imprint on her finger, though she hadn't worn it in months. Across the room, at another bench, sat Nathan, his hair dishevelled and his tie slightly loosened, as though he'd been fighting with it for hours. His blue eyes flicked toward her for just a moment, and she felt the sharp sting of all the years they'd spent building something they thought was indestructible, now crumbling like a sandcastle under the tide. The judge's gavel slammed against the wood, signalling the beginning of what Eleanor dreaded more than anything, the fight for their son, Liam. It hadn't always been like this. Eleanor and Nathan had met on a warm summer evening at a wedding neither of them had wanted to attend. She'd been sitting at the back table, nursing a glass of white wine, when he'd approached her, looking equally out of place in his navy suit and nervously holding a plate of untouched hors d'oeuvres. "You look like you hate this as much as I do," he'd said, his lopsided grin catching her completely off guard. "Weddings aren't exactly my thing," she'd replied with a shrug, though she couldn't help but smile back at him. "Mine either," Nathan had said, sitting down without waiting for an invitation. "But maybe this one's not so bad anymore." They'd spent the rest of the evening talking, dancing, and sneaking out early to share milkshakes at an all-night diner down the road. By the time the sun rose, Eleanor knew she'd found someone who made the world feel a little brighter, a little less heavy. Their relationship had been a whirlwind, full of late-night road trips, shared books, and whispered dreams of a future together. Nathan, with his quick wit and boundless energy, balanced Eleanor's quiet, steady nature. He taught her how to let go, how to embrace the chaos of life, while she grounded him, reminding him that not everything had to be a grand adventure to be meaningful. When Nathan proposed 2 years later, it was during a thunderstorm. They'd been stuck inside their tiny apartment, the rain pounding against the windows when he'd pulled out a ring and blurted, "I don't want to wait anymore." Eleanor had laughed through her tears, saying yes before he could even finish his rambling speech about love and forever. Their wedding was small but perfect. They'd written their own vows, promising to love each other through every storm and every sunrise. And for a while, they'd made good on those promises. They'd built a life together, moving into a cozy house with a bright yellow door that Eleanor had insisted on painting herself. When Liam was born, it felt like the missing piece of their puzzle had finally fallen into place. He was a perfect mix of the two of them, with Nathan's mischievous grin and Eleanor's calm eyes. But life, as it often does, wasn't as simple as they'd hoped. Nathan's career as an architect took off in ways they hadn't anticipated, with long hours and projects that took him away from home for weeks at a time. Eleanor, a writer who worked from home, found herself shouldering the brunt of parenting duties, her days filled with diaper changes and sleepless nights while Nathan chased his dreams. Resentment began to creep into their marriage, like an unwelcome guest. They started arguing about things that once seemed trivial, whose turn it was to pick up groceries, why Nathan forgot to call when he was working late, why Eleanor seemed distant, even when they were in the same room. The laughter that had once filled their home was replaced by tense silences and curt exchanges. When Eleanor discovered that Nathan had been confiding in a colleague, a woman he worked with closely on one of his projects, it felt like a betrayal, even though he swore nothing had happened. "She's just someone to talk to," he'd said, his voice heavy with frustration. "You don't understand what it's like to feel like I'm failing all the time. And you think I don't feel the same way?" Eleanor had shot back, tears streaming down her face. "I've been holding this family together while you've been chasing your career. Do you know how lonely I've been?" The cracks in their marriage deepened until one day Eleanor realized they weren't just cracks. They were canyons. They decided to separate, hoping that some space would help them find their way back to each other. But the space only revealed how far apart they'd already drifted. And now here they were, in a courtroom, fighting over the one thing they both loved more than anything: Liam. Eleanor wanted full custody, convinced that Nathan's demanding career left little room for parenting. Nathan, on the other hand, believed he deserved joint custody, arguing that he could be the father Liam needed, even if he hadn't always been present before. The judge's voice cut through the fog of Eleanor's thoughts as she listened to Nathan's lawyer argue his case. She hated this. Hated the way they'd been reduced to legal arguments and cold, factual statements about parenting schedules and financial stability. She wanted to stand up and scream that this wasn't who they were, that this wasn't the life they dreamed of when they danced in their living room with Liam perched on Nathan's shoulders, giggling uncontrollably. When it was her turn to speak, Eleanor stood, her hands trembling slightly as she addressed the court. "Nathan loves Liam," she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "I've never doubted that, but love isn't always enough. Liam needs stability, and right now, I'm the one who can provide that." As she sat back down, she caught Nathan's eye again. For a brief moment she saw the Nathan she'd fallen in love with, the man who used to bring her flowers for no reason, who once built a blanket fort in their living room just to cheer her up after a bad day. And she wondered if he was thinking the same thing about her. The custody battle stretched on for weeks, each hearing chipping away at the memories of the life they'd built together. But in the end, the judge ruled in favour of joint custody, believing that Liam deserved to have both his parents in his life. Eleanor and Nathan walked out of the courthouse side by side, the tension between them palpable. As they reached the parking lot, Nathan turned to her. "This isn't how I wanted things to be," he said quietly. "Me neither," Eleanor admitted, her voice soft. "But maybe we can figure out how to make it work. For Liam." Nathan nodded, a faint glimmer of hope in his eyes. For Liam. Over time, they found a rhythm. It wasn't easy, co-parenting rarely is, but they learned to set aside their differences for the sake of their son. They attended Liam's soccer games together, sat next to each other at parent-teacher conferences, and even managed to share holidays without too much tension. And while their marriage had ended, their love for Liam remained a constant, unshakable bond. In a way, it reminded them of the best parts of themselves, the parts they'd almost forgotten in the midst of their pain. They weren't the couple they used to be, but they were still a family in their own imperfect, beautiful way.